what is the process of both how you evaluate like, hey, maybe we need to add this program in because this thing is becoming more popular and more people are getting into it. Maybe more businesses need it. So how do you maybe evaluate and add on a program? Maybe a program needs to be taken away. Like, hey, maybe it's not as relevant. And then also, how do you determine what tools and supplies you buy? Like I noticed there was like a number of boxes. They were Macs. So it's like, hey, what goes into that? Buying the Mac versus like buying a different type of like laptop or PC. So just those two things.
So we are pretty specific about those kind of things. We had for a while, before I got here, a green design lab, which was specifically about addressing, green, climate and environmental challenges. How can we solve those with art? And so that was going for a little while. Unfortunately, I think it was going because we could find funding and because we found someone who could teach it instead of having it be motivated by what was really needed.
Or motivated by practicality.
Right. Again, I wasn't here at that time, so I can't speak whether or not there might have been other mitigating circumstances. There had, maybe there was a super demand from a group of kids or something like that, but I don't think so. I think it was a really cool lab that, sort of had died out before I even got here. I had no interest in recreating it. Until I do have it on a list along with, other things like we do have the CNC machine. So there's the potential of possibly doing furniture making. We have a furniture maker on our board who is astounding, an amazing teacher, and has done wonders with the kids so far. He comes in and does workshops. So what I have tried to do is we had all the artists here. They're all practicing artists. So whether it's them or whether it's someone they know, we maintain a list of artists and we also maintain a list of arts/crafts or both, because of course we don't see necessarily a difference. And we try to have those things so that we can offer workshops in them and see if the kids are interested. Kid interest has to be paramount.
I was going to say, like, how do you put it out? Like, is it more like to a vote? Like, hey, we're all going to vote, like what we're going to keep and what we're going to take away or what we're going to add on?
It's not really a vote. What we'll do is we'll talk to the kids and say, are you interested in learning X, Y, or Z? And then we'll do a workshop in it. And if it's something that they really like, then it's like, oh, well, do you think that you would, anonymous surveys? Do you think that this would be something that you'd want to pursue in an actual studio? Do we think there's enough that could make the studio function independently? Would it be able to support client projects? Are there clients out there who'd want to hire that studio so the kids would get real work experience? Because we don't want it to turn into just an education.
But then that's it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We want them to have that real applied. You may know if you've ever worked as a working artist, right? It's challenging working with clients. It's challenging on a number of levels. One, because you have to communicate with them and they don't speak artist.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of art schools don't even teach
that part. And we really want the kids to know that. We want the kids to be able to talk to people who want a product from them and figure out how they're going to give it to them without compromising their integrity, their values, without committing to something they can't deliver, that sort of a thing. So we have them involved in every step of that process. As I like to say, from conceptualization to fabrication and installation, they are involved in all of it. They are not just the grunt labor. So we do try to start with, like, do we have artists that can sustain this? Like, we have a whole checklist of what we do, in terms of trying to figure out, like, what do we want to bring on? Because we want to be really intentional about it. Are the kids interested in it? Because at the bottom line, if the kids aren't interested, it's not going to be a thing that accomplishes our goal, which is it has to be a thing that motivates them to continue their education and graduate or get a GED. To do one of those two things. That's what we're very invested in. So making sure that they're investing in themselves. So if they're not interested, that ain't going to work. I read this really cool article about creative education where a guy was very interested in, he just really liked NASCAR and he liked cars and he liked building cars. And he found out that the auto shop in the school had been like discontinued or whatever. So he worked with a couple of kids. But then he found out that a couple of the kids were really interested in green fuel and figuring out, like, how can you make high performance automobile that's green, that's, ecologically responsible. So he brought in the science teacher and said, let's find out.
Yeah, I was gonna say F1 actually has like an all electric division, which is crazy to me.
So to me, I thought that was great. He started with something the kids were interested in, making cars, building stuff, working with their hands, and then brought in a science teacher to make it interdisciplinary and solve a problem for society. That's really what we're trying to do. So we want to make sure the kid can use it, can transfer the skills from it, can transfer the technology that they learn to something else if they're interested. And that they can start at one place and end in another, meaning that they have to show progress in skill acquisition, that there's not a dead end to that. We have to make sure that we can support it and that we can realistically shop that out to, for example, employers in the Blackstone Valley or with the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce. We engage with these folks all the time. We say, what do you need in your employees? What do you look for? What do you want? What's going to get my kids a job? Because we want them to have that option. We do not do anything to sell the kids to the job, to the employer. We don't provide them. But we do say to the kids, here are the folks we know. We've vetted them. They're clean. They're supportive. They'll give you health benefits. They'll treat you well. Go and apply if you want. We want to know that any place that we mention to our kids that has an internship or that are looking for employees is a good place to work. So we do that.
So something that comes up for me, actually, the second part of that question, how do you evaluate the tools that you end up using? Is it like
right? Yeah.
How much evaluation goes in there? Do you like how much of it is based on industry standards? How much of it is based on price? Because like that's the thing with like nonprofits things as well, is that price is sometimes the issue. Sometimes just, hey, we're going to buy because we know we can get the job done to a certain level. We don't need to buy the highest end thing. Right. So what goes into that process for you, like as far as what tools and like what you buy so that the kids coming here can actually make things? Right.
We want to be industry standard. So, for example, we appealed to the Champlin Foundation. They actually helped. They do all kinds of capital improvements, and they've been very supportive because they're very much of the whole build capacity. And we often go after them and say, hey, if you give us this, we can do this. So it's a teach a person to fish kind of thing, right? So with the CNC machine, for example, well, you mentioned Apple. Why do we use Apple products? We use Apple because, generally speaking,
I just saw the box. I was like, that's a good example. So I was like, let me just go with that.
We use the box. The box that you're referencing is because we built a wall out of the boxes because we don't waste stuff, and they're pretty. So so we built a room divider out of the boxes. We use Photoshop. We use all of the Creative Cloud, and that's because even though it's expensive, we don't get any educational discount. It was really important to us if we were going to do industry standard that they don't use the free mock-ups of that software, that they actually use this software. So also during COVID, we sent the computers home to the kids because it had the software on it, right? And it had the license and all that kind of stuff. So we wanted, we chose Apple for the same reason, much to the chagrin of my last graphic designer who was like, I hate Apple, please make it stop. Nonetheless, we use that.
Because it's the expectation. And you can make the argument that like, certain skills are transferable regardless of software. Like if you know how to image edit on one program, you can probably image, you know what I mean? But it's just we having that familiarity. Like if you can give them the advantage of doing that, why not?
Exactly.
Like, I want our kids, if you don't have the money, but if you do, why not?
Yeah. And that's my argument to people. I'm like, I say to people all the time, to funders and stuff, and I'm like, when they want to talk to me about money, and I'm like, well, we could also just not serve any kids and that would save us money.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? If we're doing industry standard, I need the kid to be able to put on their resume, they've worked with the Creative Cloud, they know the specific software, and therefore can transfer it to any other software that any other employer might use that's not.
I was going to say, why aren't you mad at the industry as much as you are at me? Like shouldn't you be mad at the industry for employing the standard? Like, why are you taking out on me? Like, then, don't you need to point the finger at yourself a little bit, buddy? Like,
don't punish my kids.
Yeah.
You're telling me this is what the standard is? So then that means
what are
I'm sending them
here?
out with the standard. Absolutely. But when we decided to buy our CNC machine, our artistic director had a specific set of criteria. Do we need the top of the line model? No, we don't. We're never going to be a small manufacturer churning out like 100 candlesticks or something like that, or, 1 million charcuterie boards that are, engraved and epoxied. We're not. However, we need something that approximates what they will find in a small manufacturer.
Or on the job site. We need to get as close to the on the job. Like this needs to be as close to on the job training as possible.
Right, exactly. So as long as we are getting a CNC machine that is completely run in exactly the same way of any CNC machine that they will find anywhere, super high end, super low end. So we went with something in the middle that was going to do what we wanted to do in terms of the product output that we want to do, and that the kids could use and understand, but that was also to a scale that was appropriate for us, size wise as well as everything else. And we went to a bunch of different places around here because again, our kids have transportation issues. So I always start with what's around here. So we went to local manufacturers and we looked at their machines and we said, okay, what do you have? What might our kids be exposed to in the future? And so we bought something with that knowledge.
So something else that comes to mind is if you could walk through just what is the typical, if there is such thing, what is the typical day like for a student that comes here? And actually, what is a typical day like for a teacher that comes here as well? And I ask that because the hours are probably going to be different than a traditional school because the traditional school operates at a certain time and you're working around that time. Yeah. So possibly before, possibly after, possibly not on weekdays. So if you could just talk about kind of just how this place is run from the teacher perspective, but also how the student experiences it from a day-to-day perspective as well.
Sure. We're actually kind of shifting it a little bit. Like, for example, today you're here on a Monday. We don't have the program on a Monday. We have program running Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We do it every day if we could afford it, but we just can't. So right now, our famous sort of arts education and training program, that's the one that's been sort of nationally recognized and what generally is our foundation, that runs as an after-school program, 3 to 6, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. In the summers, because we are unusual in that we run year-round. So in the summers, they are here 3 days a week, 5 hours each day. And so again, that's about, trying to combat learning loss, trying to make sure that they're not getting into shenanigans, that they're, gainfully employed doing something that they enjoy, with adults they trust, during the summer months. So those are the hours for the kids. The artists have to be here when the kids are here, because we absolutely demand, in-person education. We have certainly made, accommodations otherwise. We had one artist who happened to have a period where he needed some medical care. So we had him do a hybrid schedule and he met with those kids and he did it like where he was on the computer and they were in the studio, and that worked great, because it was better to do that and keep them with their instructor that they loved and trusted than to bring somebody else in. And it also meant we got to support our staff member. That's a win-win. So we've done that. COVID, we had the kids, we're a mandatory reporting agency as a social service agency, which means we're like to be eyes on the kids so that if there's something going on in the home or if they're not safe or they're exhibiting signs of unwellness or bruises, things like that, we see them. So it was really important that we had a cameras on policy during COVID. So we sent art supplies home and they worked with us from their computers. They had certain outcomes they were responsible for, programs and anything that they needed. We delivered to them, any kind of supplies that they needed to do it. It's still not as good. We prefer to be in person. We prefer always to be in person because that's how applied learning works. So the artists can, again, accordingly have to be here during program hours with, barring those kinds of exceptions. Other than that, they have very flexible hours, but then so does every staff member at Riverzedge Arts. We all have laptops. We all have all the stuff we need loaded onto those laptops. So the artists have all the industry standard, Creative Cloud and stuff like that. I have everything I need to see what they're working on, or so that when they send it to me, I can open it and look at it. And the sort of idea behind that is we recognize that if every kid needs an ILP or an IEP, so does every staff member. Every job is specific. So the hours are to do the job. So my communication person is here 3 days a week. They're full time, but they're here 3 days a week. They're at home 2 days a week. Cool. Gets it done. I have a work from home Wednesdays because that's when I do my budgeting and my scary numbers where nobody wants to interrupt me. So the instructors, generally speaking, are here 3 to 6, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and other hours. They are at home, they're designing, they're reporting in, they're calling in, they're doing whatever they need to do. We do not have a lot of micromanagement here because we also recognize that as artists, they need to be working artists, which means that even if they're full-time here with benefits, which we've tried to do for most of the artists, because I think that's really important to invest in your staff, particularly if they're artists, because there's not enough investment in arts. We want to make sure that they also have the ability to do their own practice, to be working artists, and to go to juried things. And we have professional development budgets for them for that purpose. So yeah, a typical day doesn't really exist. A typical day might exist for the media arts person. A typical day might exist for the graphic design person, but they're going to be typical only to them because we've crafted those jobs specifically for those positions, not for those people, but for those positions.
What goes into the construction of those individualized learning plans? Like because I think that's just something like that's a bit more behind the scenes that I think people don't realize. Like,
Okay.
well, how do you structure this learning for them? Like, how do you break it down?
Right.
Especially when not all projects. So there's like anybody who's worked on any project, like not all projects are the same. Things get overrun, things happen. So how do you, like, unlike a traditional school where it's like, okay, we just have to teach them these things this year in this amount of time and that's it. There's not a lot of variables that's going to screw that up. Whereas if you're working with businesses and things like that, they could be like, oh, you have 2 weeks. No, now we actually need it tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, and then that, so how do you like keep a structured learning? How do you put that together, but then also account for, you know, like teaching them the art, teaching them the skills, but then teaching them the business side and also account for you're dealing with businesses, so there's a variable and like, do you put wiggle room in? So I'm just really curious as to like how you put that together. We
do put wiggle room in. Our artistic director is a working artist, a working woodworker, a flower farmer, and has an MFA from RISD. So he is, and a ton of experience doing this work. So he's very careful and works very closely with each of the artists to make sure that we're taking appropriate jobs. If the kids can't do the job, we don't take that job. An example of this would be, for example, we have chosen as our staff has just agreed that this is what we feel is appropriate, that we don't do any photography or media coverage of an event that has alcohol in it, because then the kids would have to be there, and we just don't think that's appropriate. So, that means that if we get a call and say, hey, can you cover our annual dinner? We want some still photography and we want some B-roll, you know, videography or whatever for our donors or something like that. We'll say, okay, sure. What time is it? Well, if it's a pancake breakfast from 11 to 2, our kids are in school. Nope, sorry, can't do that. If, however, I'll leave it at that for that moment. If it's someone saying, oh, well, it's at night, and we go, oh, okay, great. That's great. Will there be alcohol? Yes, there'll be alcohol. Well, then we're not going to send our kids. So no, we're not going to take that job. Call us if you've got something else. We'd love to help you. We just can't do that. Most places are really understanding. They actually really respect that. And then we actually get another job from it. If, however, we have the ability to shake something up and do something a different way, then we will. So, for example, this past year, we said, well, what about when we do have jobs that we could cover because they're perfectly appropriate for youth, both at skill level and in terms of the cultural norms that are being exhibited, and we want the kids to be able to do it, but it's during school time. Well, we can't take them out of school. However, we can work with kids who are in the Career and Tech Center for whom this is now a really cool opportunity. So we started working with some of their seniors. We created a program with their instructors over there who said, well, we really want to get our kids to have some on-the-job training. So we'll bring our kids to meet you. They'll work with your artist and we'll take them home. And so we've done that, and they get academic credit for it. So that's one way we've kind of creatively solved that problem, where we have a client that's appropriate and a job that's appropriate, but we don't have the personnel with the kids. That said, one of the other situations that you've mentioned where a client might say at the last minute, oh, I need to, change this, or I need this tomorrow, where I thought I had, extra time. Generally speaking, we do try to caution all our clients that we work maybe a little bit slower because we're working with kids and the process has to be pedagogical first and foremost. So we try to build in enough wiggle room where we think, okay, if you're going to need this in 6 weeks, let's start planning for let's try to make sure that we have enough time, or we're going to have to change the scope of work so that it can fit within, say, 8 weeks, because we want to plan for 8 weeks, but you've only given us 6, something like that, right? So we try to make sure we do that. In terms of, and quite frankly, again, we haven't had too many clients who have not been understanding of that. They come to us with an understanding of who we are. We keep all of this stuff in our contracts. We let them know, why we have the rules that we have or the guidelines that we have. And most of them are really, really respectful of that. If we can't accommodate them, they just come back with a different job later. That's great. But in terms of one of the other things that has happened because of that, because of the way we work, our kids do get this sort of weird on-the-job training that most kids would never have. When we were doing a series of billboards for the Rhode Island Department of Health, we actually had a health professional who was a health professional and a marketing professional, both from Rideout, on the phone with one of our kids, being like, "Yeah, we need you to make the following changes. Here's why. Can you do it and send it back to me in real time?" Kid made the changes, sent it back in 10 minutes, got on the phone again.
That answers my other question. Is there a buffer between the businesses and the kids? And it
Not
seems like
necessarily.
There isn't. Okay.
We curate it very carefully. We curate the relationship very carefully. For example, anyone who comes into this space, even physically, if they're walking around and the kids are here, they have to have a BCI. If they're going to work with the kids or be alone with the kid, they have to have a national background check with the fingerprints. We have to keep that on file. So having someone who's a client come in means they'll either come here and they'll meet with the entire studio together, including the artist instructor, or the artist instructor hops in our van, takes the kids with them, and goes to have what is preferred, which is an on-site experience for the kids, where that client is like, "Cool, let me show you around, let me give you the context for the job, and then let me tell you what the job is." And then once that's been established, and once we have the youth being comfortable, then we will allow for a direct interaction, like on the phone or via email or something like that. Generally speaking, it almost always goes through the studio instructor, because at the end of the day, they're the responsible artists, who are making sure that it's appropriately, professional to leave the studio. We don't send people work that says this is pretty good for a kid. We send people work that says this is industry standard work.
Question, just like a little side question I have about that. Has there ever been, I hope not, but I'm trying to be realistic in this question too. Because there's always that, like, I think there's like an Instagram post where it was like, I designed, you watch, this much money, like, or like you design and I watch, like, this much money. And the reason why I find it funny is because this is also from talking with other people, there are just sometimes impossible clients, like no matter what you do, it's not it's not exactly the thing in their head, but it's because they can't communicate what they want, or they'll try to say something is bad or not what they want. Not because it's actually bad, it actually is what they want, but they're trying to grind you to get more out of you for free, right? And there are people in businesses who, because they think, oh, it's an artist and they should just be happy to be getting paid. Like, I have the freedom to do that, which is a jerk thing to do. Have there ever been negative interactions like that where it's like, possibly the poor kid could possibly think that they're doing a bad job, but it's no, that's just business is just grinding them just to get more out of them. Has that ever happened? And like, how does this place deal with that?
We haven't ever had any of that happen, because
good, thankfully.
If it starts to go in that direction, the studio instructor steps in and deals with it. And if the studio instructor, as themselves a working artist, is, if we feel like they're being manipulated or taken advantage of, then artistic director steps in. And then if there's, in terms of because again, he has navigated that world of being a professional artist, but also a professional woodworker, which means he's been seen as a craftsperson and an artisan, as well as being, a painter in the fine arts world. He has a very good facility with making sure of how he talks to all the different types of clients. However, if it becomes an issue of something where there's like a really unpleasant client who's making a problem, and I think that it's a legal issue and all that, then I step in and tell them to take a walk. And we've just turned down a job, or we say we're just not comfortable working with you, or we're going to finish this job and we're not going to work with you again, for the following reasons. And we'll make sure that everybody knows why.
So something else that comes to mind when it comes to like criteria of this place is so going on with the example of like, maybe you just have like a jerk client, right? That shouldn't, just because the client's a jerk, they can't, it's hard to tell like when you're in the, when you're doing this as a profession, like, sometimes it makes you think like, oh, am I as good as I think I am? Like, is this client right? ... So how do you create the criteria of like, how do you grade the kids? Like, how do you actually know like if a kid's progressing or not progressing, and like at the level they should be progressing at, or like, how can you tell if like, maybe the kid like, because, teenagers do teenager things, like half-ass things. So like, how can you tell if like, how do you set it up so like, hey, we can tell you're half-assing this. We know you can do a lot more, because art is subjective. It's weird. Like how, like, what is your criteria of like seeing if somebody's progressing, or what if they're really good on like the art, like the making, the artistic side, but the whole like business side, like they're just so just because there is that dichotomy too that I keep hearing about where it's like person's a great artist but they're a crap businessman and so they don't make any money off their art because but some people just aren't meant to do that business part. That's why they hire another business person like, hey, you handle this. I just want to go do the thing. How do you set up a system of criteria where it's like you can evaluate accurately?
Yeah. So we do have rubrics. Like I said before, we have these 3 different areas that we're looking for skills acquisition. One is professionalization. Are you showing up on time? Are you paying attention? Are you on your phone when we've asked you not to be? Are you responsive to your studio director in sort of just ways that, you know, say, hey, can you do this right now? And they're just lollygagging, that sort of thing. We have social emotional. Can they take criticism? Can they give criticism in a compassionate way? Are they supportive when a fellow artist who's a fellow peer is having a problem or an issue or something like that? We want those to happen. And those we can, in terms of professionalization, there are very, very clear metrics for judging that. In terms of social emotional, there are educational metrics for judging that. Where the art part comes in, where the industry standard part comes in, that's harder. That's a lot harder, especially because of the way we do things, which is a kid will come in at any time, and they might be new to the studio. And so they might not have some certain, the same background that another kid has, right? Kids might learn at different rates. So they might be, a kid who is here for 3 weeks might have a very different set of skills than someone who's there for 6 months. But there also might be someone who's been there for 6 months who has ADHD and or some other kind of learning difference, and they just take longer or they need different things. So we try, first of all, we have had a lot of experience with a bunch of different kids and a bunch of different types of needs. And so we're always trying to develop new tools for teaching, first of all, because a lot of kids don't read by learning. In fact, most learners don't learn by reading. I'm one of like the 3% that do. So we are always trying to try different things. Is this person, a verbal learner, an active learner? These things, these are not real categories. I'm making them up because there are real names for these things, but I'm not a pedagogical K through 12 person. So we do try to look at those different ways of acknowledging different levels that are going to be present among different learners. Now that said, okay, how do you use a metric or a rubric to figure out if they're advancing? We try to do a pre and a post. So at like 3 or 4 different times a year, we'll do we'll be able to have the pre or the baseline where the kid came in. We evaluated their skills. Could they do this? Did they know what this was? Had they ever touched a camera before? That kind of thing, which we do on a mix of 2 weeks of just experiential working with the kid and also talking with the kid and asking about their experience. And then from there, that's their sort of baseline. We do have on our timesheets, we also have like effort reporting and participation. We ask, we figure out like what was their level of participation this week? Did they seem distracted? Were they okay? There's lots of different like qualitative things that we write in. And then we also have a situation where we will figure out on certain because we don't have a traditional curriculum, our staff actually have to work kind of harder or differently, where they will actually look at what the end result is supposed to be and then bust it down into learning objectives.
Yeah, it's like work backwards from it almost.
Right. And bust it down into learning objectives for that project. And so based on that, we'll look at the dossier of projects that the kid has worked on. Did they show advancing skills in areas or in skills that they had to repeat across different projects? If they didn't, that tells us there's something wrong in how we're teaching or what's going on in the studio. If they did, that's great. That's exactly what we want. But there might be other mitigating factors as well. So we try to look into, it's not neat. It's not neat at all. There's quantitative stuff that we do measure, and then there's qualitative stuff, and most of our stuff is qualitative. The quantitative stuff that we measure are grades at school, a number of hours that they're attending school out of eligible hours, number of hours they attend program out of eligible hours, the attendance at program, did they come late or leave early.